Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone, and welcome to our holiday edition of Intentionally Act Live. My name is Tima Walker, and I'll be your host for the next hour. So, we've been away for a little while, but we wanted to intentionally close out the year with some food for thought. With us today, we're joined by Enrico Manalo, Dr. Atiya Martin, and Janeen Williamson. So, how are we all doing today?
Doing great. Happy to
Yeah,
be here.
very happy to be here.
Good.
Thanks, Stephen.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining me today. So let's go and get right into it. So it is the holiday season, and I'm sure a lot of people like myself are just coming back from family gatherings where there was plenty of food, not always uh, not always the best of foods. We like to sweets in and have good things to eat. Um, comfort foods. But I know with that being said, with all that, we have to have a balanced diet, right? So part of that comes with having your proteins, your fruits, your vegetables, and all that other fun stuff. So you might be thinking, what are we talking about? The sense of diet. So diet for us stands for diversity, inclusion, equity, and transformation. What we're going to be talking about today is what that looks like in the workplace. So everyone has a story about veggies, right? Me personally, I have them as a kid, and if you have children, which I do, we all have those stories about kids who get something put on their plate, like, oh, you know what, I don't want to eat that, and we kind of say, you got to eat that, and you don't always understand why. So for me, I can talk about this rather recently, where I made something for dinner, and I have two sons, and my oldest, who is the picky one out of the group, was not trying to have what was prepared for him. And, it kind of turned into this back and forth where I was frustrated because I was trying to give him something that was good for him and he didn't like it. And he didn't understand that I wasn't doing it to be mean or, be the bad parent, but it was just simply, hey, this is what it is. And I want you to go big, healthy, and strong. And, there's just a lot of confusion and angst that came with that. So that actually leads me to the thought of the day. So our thought of the day is having a balanced diet, diversity, inclusion, equity, and transformation. Might feel like you're being told that you have to eat your vegetables at some points in the process. Might not want to do it, but you know what's good for you. So the first thing that comes with that is resistance. And Enrico, I'm going to kick it off to you. What's some of the resistance that you might see in the workplace when it comes to your diet?
Yeah, definitely, Stephen, and thank you. Well, your story makes me think of some of the parallels that I see of resistance in our clients, right? So by now, I think the public in general are familiar with the idea that sometimes people are mandated to take diversity training, right? You have to take it. But people don't love being told what to do, right? And so often what happens is you're told you have to do something, and whether you are aware of it or not, people sometimes just dig their heels in, right? And they might not even know why. But it's something that exists in all of us, and I really think that it starts really young, right? So I definitely remember being told to eat my vegetables when I was a kid and sometimes not wanting to because it was like the tiny little bit of control or like agency that I could exert in the moment. And, I would hold on to that little tiny ember because it was the only thing I had. Right. And I wasn't even really aware of why or the impact that it was having on these like longer term things. And then I definitely remember getting into those back and forths with my parents, like asking why do I have to do this? And my mom coming back with, because I said so, or because I'm the authority here. I know better, but not really, now that I'm a little bit older and I have, I've learned a lot about conflict. And there's a lot of research that supports this as well. Like if you want to, there was a study done where people were asking strangers for $1. And one of the fascinating things was what they found was if you can explain why you need the dollar first, then people are much more likely to comply. But if you're just asking out of nowhere, then people are like sometimes not prepared or warmed up to the idea, and that's where a lot of that resistance can come in. So I think for racial equity work, sometimes we have to lay down the foundations for why, and then model the kind of behaviors that we want to see in people. But unfortunately, that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, I definitely can relate to that. I know I've been guilty of telling my kids because I said so. And maybe that was a part of me just wanted to have some power and to be like, just do what I say. But I think that the same approach happens in the workplace, like you said, Rico, when there is not a clear understanding from leadership about why this work is happening, what is in it for the employees, how is it going to help me day to day, what is it going to do for the benefit of the organization as a whole. It's like, of course people are going to push back. I think that that's just like you said, it's like human nature. It's something we learned as a child, and maybe we didn't understand why then. We might not even understand as adults why we're pushing back, but there has to be some kind of like understanding that's shared from the leadership level to help people connect their jobs and their roles to that as well.
No, that's a great point. So what I'm hearing is there's a kind of a supremacy culture that goes with saying, just do it because I said so. And a lot of times, how things are prepared and how things are brought up can be a key ingredient to how people take the idea of eating the vegetables in diversity, inclusion, equity, transformation work. So with that resistance, is there an idea that there needs to be an incentive program? So I will explain a little bit more. So a lot of times people say, you know what, we have this DE&I work, and if you do it, we'll give you a few days off, or, we'll give you this extra thing to kind of sweeten the deal. Is that a good thing? Does that work? Is that, help bring the best, ideas out, or, what's the thought behind that?
Yeah, I think if you think about that same, thinking back to your childhood, if you don't eat your vegetables, you can't get dessert. It was a threat, right? It wasn't something that was giving you the ability to have autonomy or make decisions on your own. It was like, okay, I'm going to do this just so I get dessert. And so having that like reward system, I don't think was helpful as a child in me understanding anything like what's good, what's bad, what to do, what not to do. It was just an opportunity for me to kind of get the thing that I wanted. But I think when it comes to diversity work, the incentive should be making sure that the people that are doing the work are incentivized for being an organizer, or they're given some kind of monetary or some kind of acknowledgement or value that they're taking time out of their day and they're taking time out of their everyday job to do this work for the organization. So it's less of an incentive for people to just participate and more of a opportunity to actually give people that are leading the work and that are doing this outside of their job some kind of compensation, whether that's time off or an actual bonus or money, but making sure that people that are doing the work are acknowledged for putting all that extra effort into it outside of their day-to-day job.
Yeah, and sometimes I see people kind of resorting to the incentives of like the moral high ground, right? It's the right thing to do. And that might be true, but I mean, if somebody's coming at you with, you need to do this thing because it's the right thing to do, then often what happens is people kind of have this moment where, and again, this is almost entirely subconscious, where they're feeling like, well, I'm a good person and I'm not doing this. So are you saying that I'm a bad person for not doing this? And then the resistance kind of is amplified. We also know from the research on incentives, notably in the field of behavioral economics, that certain, like if you incentivize too much, like for example, CEO salaries, right? They have these huge compensation packages, but sometimes the effect there is the reward becomes so great that people actually become more afraid of losing the reward than actually of getting the work done, right? And so aligning your incentives is really, really very tricky. So I think one of the things that we want people to really fully grasp is by engaging in racial equity work, their day-to-day lives are going to become better, right? Doing their work is going to become easier. Their impact is going to be more in alignment with their values and these kinds of things. But one of the difficulties is that this work takes a lot of time, right? So those rewards are not always going to be immediately apparent. I'd love to hear what Dr. Martin has to say about this as well.
Well, you all covered most of I think, important points on this. One of the things that I think, going back to what Janeen was mentioning in terms of what is important to people doing DEI work, whether this is their full-time job, whether this is they're volunteering to do this, that ultimately people want to be seen for their work. They want to be valued for what they contribute. And I think sometimes we jump to incentives that have been shown to not be sustainable long term, right? To Rico's point, that we really need to connect why people are in the jobs they're in, what motivates them. You can't motivate people. People have to be motivated within themselves to be most effective and for there to be sustainability. And I think there's a misunderstanding about what it is that people need. Everyone goes to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But if you read later into Maslow's actual own research and own writing, he says, everyone thinks that you have to go through each layer, right? Like you need to have your basic needs met, then you do this, then you do that. And that's actually not how it works. That in fact, having relationships can help you get all those other things that are basic needs, right? Being clear about your purpose and vision can help you thrive more in organizations and with other people, as well as have your basic needs met. And so I think refocusing our energy on the things that matter most to people, which there's a ton of research on, instead of what we think matters to people, is an important part of this process.
Oh, we've got a comment coming in from Kashana Evans, who says, I think the real opportunity is empowering people to grow together. There is so much value in that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kashana. That's absolutely foundational, right? It's about the relationships, right? And I'll share this really quickly and then transition. So it's really fascinating how important relationships are to people, even introverts, right? Like everyone wants to be in relationships with other people, meaningful, supportive relationships, healthy relationships. And sometimes we'll settle for any relationship for the sake of being in relationship with other people. And so us in organizations working really hard to create the kind of spaces that facilitate more healthy relationships so that people can work better together, so that they can connect better to the values of the organization and how it relates to their work. And then the last thing I'll say on this point is I think there's also a misperception that there are these hard skills and these soft skills, right? When in reality, the things people refer to as soft skills are foundational skills, right? And so, and which connects back to this idea of relationships and people and being able to navigate in those situations. And this idea about the power of relationships and the danger of relationships. So the some of the challenges that we face in organizations are tied to let me reframe. Most of the challenges in organizations are tied to our humanity. So
Shocking news, everyone.
shocking, right? Like if you've ever supervised or managed people or been in a senior leadership team, you deal with people issues most of the day. So that said, one of the things that we have to realize in this when we think about people and habits and what motivates us part of the things that can be challenges for people in the workplace is this idea of the pain of social rejection. And I think we don't factor that in enough. That when we don't have healthy environments for people to fully engage and participate, when people feel like there's a threat or danger of being rejected, or if they actually experience rejection, they feel it in the same way as you've experienced physical pain.
Mm.
And so that can be really problematic when you're trying to do DEI work. And then this connecting back to this power of people growing together. When in healthy environments, the opposite of pain is pleasure, right? People feel they have these euphoric moments when they're able to do good work together. So I just wanted to be really explicit about that. And thank you, Kashana, for bringing that up.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you all for your implements. It's been all very good. So we're on this trip with having a balanced diet and how that equates to the workplace when it comes to diversity and inclusion work. So with any good balanced meal, you have to have all your food groups. So you gotta have your proteins, you gotta have your carbs, your vegetables, and you gotta throw a little dessert in there. You know, I like my sweets. So let's start at the top. What are kind of the meat and potatoes of diversity and equity work?
I think a lot of times when I think of meat and potatoes type of stuff, I think of things that are hearty, things that are like stick to your ribs, make you feel good. And for diversity work, I feel like that to a lot of people we've worked with in organizations is like the action plan. So having a really hearty, detailed action plan that you can chew on for a little while, that over time, you have that ability to implement. And sometimes I found that clients will want to jump to this part of the work. But for what we do at All Aces, we really believe in, being a co-creator with our clients and coming to that part at the end after we've done a lot of time and focus on speaking with people, running focus groups, doing some survey research, really trying to understand who you are, what your challenges are, who the people are in your organization. Dr. Martin earlier talked about the humanity pieces, right? So before you can have an action plan that's really going to give you that long-term success, that's going to be detailed, that's going to have things that are tied to what you do, you have to really make sure you take the time to do that upfront work to understand your organization and your challenges. But the meat and potato certainly is having that action plan in the end that gives you that long-term success.
Go ahead, Dr. Martin.
Oh no, I was just going to say that this idea of action planning and being able to do work collaboratively is also anchored in the organizational or collective values. So, what is it that we believe in? Who do we think we are collectively? How do we do the work? And in being clear about who we are and what we believe in, it allows us to create action plans that are more based in reality and that are less likely to fall apart when we hit walls, which are inevitable when you put together a plan, right? So being able to remain adaptable in the face of vulnerability, of the volatility that comes with this work, the uncertainty, the complexity, and the overall ambiguity that can make things harder for us, that we are able to navigate in really adaptive and flexible ways. And the thing that allows us to do that, or one of the things that allows us to do that collectively, is having clear values. It's like the anchor that keeps us safe from blowing away in all different directions, depending on which way the wind is blowing, external factors, so that we can stay focused on the road ahead. And I know I just mixed metaphors of water and roads, but you all know what I'm talking about. So that said, it's really, I think if we're thinking about main ingredients in meals, values have to be at the center of the action plan. Otherwise, we're just doing stuff. We're not doing meaningful stuff that's anchored in who we're trying to be and how we're trying to do the work.
No, thank you all for that. That's great. So, I mean, so far we've talked about having strong values, and we've talked about having an action plan, and that's really settling the foundation of your protein portion of your diet. So, we've talked about the proteins. Let's talk a little bit about the vegetables and the aspects of this kind of work. Sometimes people are like, I don't like this green thing. I don't like this orange thing. What are some of those concepts that come up in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, a vegetable in this scenario would probably be like self-reflection. And I know that there's been a lot of talk in recent years about mindfulness and self-reflection, and like people make lots of jokes about yoga and like Eastern thought creeping into our everyday lives. But I'll admit that I engage in some of this myself, and I found it really very nourishing. And one of the things that I love about the way that all this approaches the work is a lot of it stems from this idea that we can't have real organizational change unless the people that make up the organization are also going through some change. And so that begins with self-reflection. And so if we have, like, especially against that backdrop of strong values that Dr. Martin was talking about, right? So once we're clear on our values, how we stay aligned with those values is by creating a little bit of space for us to think, right? Like, if I'm flashing back to the worst things that have happened to me in life, it was often because I wasn't thinking clearly, right? And so finding ways that I can create space for myself to get out of that fight, flight, or freeze kind of thing, or just the reactive thing sometimes even, is really, really helpful. And what I've noticed is when you give people, or you model for people, create space for people to do this, they will do it. They might not, it might not exactly match their idea of what mindfulness looks like. You don't have to go into a half or full lotus position and like get your resonating bowl out like the incense or anything like that. You can just kind of close your eyes. You don't have to close your eyes. You can, however you like to do it, just reflect, like, what am I trying to do here? What's actually going on? How am I actually feeling about it? Why am I feeling that way? And just going through that takes, like, I don't know, a very, very, very small amount of time. That can really set us up for a number of outcomes that are more in line with our values, right? And this is definitely the case when it comes to conflict, which is also a part of organizational life, right? So sometimes just creating that pause, I think, is a really nourishing thing.
I love what you said, Rico, about creating that pause and that connection to self-reflection. It certainly can be one of those things that's like a vegetable. It's not the first thing you want to eat on your plate. It's hard to look in the mirror. It's hard to really like peel back that onion and think about, well, what makes up my identity? Who am I? How have I developed an understanding around culture? Is it like things I was taught as a child? What did I hear in my household? What are some of the experiences I've had with people that look like me? What are experiences I've had with people that don't look like me? All of that stuff adds up to like who you are, but it takes time to have that moment of self-reflection to see like, oh, this is where it comes from. This is why I think that way. And then also have the courage to then maybe change it. Because sometimes when you look in the mirror, you kind of find out that you're not exactly who you thought you were.
That's a tough one.
And that's tough. That's not easy. But it is so key for this work because, like you said, it's about the people in the organization. It's about the humanity of, like, if we're going to evolve and we're going to change and we're going to be a disruptor of, like, whatever's going on that we don't feel is good, then we have to do it.
Oh, I just want to jump in here. Kashana Evans is back. with this comment. Sometimes people may be staring at a wonderful dessert, and because they've been conditioned that it's cold broccoli, they can fall into that trap. I think that's avoidable. Thank you so much for that, Kashana. That resonates.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting because it brings us back to um, the ways that we perceive things based on to some of what Janine was saying about past experiences, but also kind of the way that society communicates to us about things. And if you're a good cook, right, then vegetables don't have to taste bad, right? When you know how to prepare things in ways that are appealing and sometimes that are hidden to people, they don't even know they're eating vegetables, right? And so the opportunity for us in DEI work is to not to be sure that we are consciously not fighting oppression with more oppression,
Hmm.
right? That we are meeting people where they are, that we recognize that some people have been conditioned to see this vegetable as disgusting, even though vegetables are the most nutrient dense part of a meal you can have, even though it's one of the most significantly positively contributors to our health overall. The goal is how do we learn to love the process of preparing it and sharing it with other people, as well as the reality of the pain that people go through in looking in that mirror, right? And creating the space for people to to authentically have those experiences and have empathy for them, because not all of us have been doing this work forever. And at some point, we didn't have that information and we were struggling with what these things mean. And if we're still deeply involved in this work and we're really committed to it, we're continuously looking in that mirror and remembering that as we're trying to help other people look in the mirror and really learn to build a relationship with themselves and with each other. And I think that back to the point that Kashana made earlier, the way that people disregard humanity and relationships and don't understand that that is what this is all about, right? And not DEI work, but everything we do in life is about humanity and relationships, and being able to navigate those well. And then I'll just lastly say that, you know, being in this theme of not fighting oppression with oppression, making sure that we are not being self-righteous, like we are better than everybody else, we know all the right answers, and using shame and blame to try to finger wag at people is really counterproductive. Sometimes it makes us feel good in the moment, but if we're really going to accomplish our goals in helping to move a group forward collectively, helping individuals on their journey in order to improve the overall journey of everyone, then we have to approach it consciously as folks who are managing ourselves in leadership roles, whether they're formal leadership roles or informal leadership roles in facilitating this work. And so our work we do with clients is really about modeling what are the ways that we can respect our humanity? What are the ways that we can collectively work on these things together? And what are the ways that we can be consistently intentional about not falling into the trap of letting the agenda trump people's humanity?
Yeah.
So I'll stop there.
No, thank you all for that. I just want to point out, Rika, you had spoken about, the self-reflection piece and the humanity of it. I think sometimes that's where, we struggle because we have to admit that we are still human and we don't get everything right all the time. And, the way we perceive or what we've been taught might not be the right way. And again, that's okay, but it also means you have to say, what, I've been wrong for a long time or a short amount of time, whatever. And I think that takes a lot of guts and courage But it also enables you to, once you start doing that, to be able to empathize with other people and the situations, you know, that they're going through. So I really appreciate that. But that also kind of leads into, you know, my next thought. So Dr. Martin, you had spoken a little bit about the education piece and learned behaviors. So, you know, learned behaviors are, you know, they come from, you know, consistent way of doing things, you know, what you've been around. You know, how do we change that? How do we unlearn and, you know, kind of learn the right way, I'm sorry, to 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 understanding, you know, your what your diet really needs and consists of.
So a couple of things. So one is I want to be explicit about systems, right? And we're talking about systems of oppression and the ideas that influence us. Yes, they come from our individual experiences. To your point, Stephen, they also come from everything around us in society. Every movie, every radio show, every video, music video we've watched, social media, kind of all of these different sources are reinforcing a lot of flawed ways of being able to see the world, right? It puts up a lot of filters that we don't always realize are there. And so if we're able to, the points made earlier, acknowledge that this is the shared reality for all of us. And in absence of having knowledge, skills, and tools to not just recognize that we have bias, not just like implicit bias, but that we have this whole world of things that's influencing every decision that we make, including implicit biases, then it allows us some freedom to really be able to understand ways that we can change those dynamics, right? And so when we're thinking about how trainings work and how we help to people go through that journey, the goal is to help people see things for themselves and not PowerPoint them to death. Right? The goal is to create learning experiences that tap into the actual experiences of the people in the room. There are times, again, this is where that self-righteousness has to be managed because, yes, we do, as content experts, technical experts, know a lot of the language, we know strategies and tools and all of these things. But the people who are in the space with us are the context experts. They're the context experts on their own experiences. They're the context experts on what that means to their day-to-day work. And they're the context experts on where they see opportunities for there to be improvements in an organization. And so our work in delivering trainings has to be about surfacing those experiences and in the context that folks are bringing and helping them be able to name those things, helping them to be able to contextualize it in real life. So not just conceptual ideas of words, but like, what does that mean to how do I do my job every day? What does that mean to how I lead every day? And what does that mean for me as someone in an organization who wants to see change? And maybe I'm not in a leadership role, but I want to influence things. And so that's the opportunities that we have to be better and do better with trainings, and as well as education, right? Education and trainings. Education being the conceptual stuff, right? In kind of being able to lean into complexity. And then there's the actual, but like, how do you do that in real life? And I think that's the piece that people really need support on at every level of an organization in order to do good action planning together so that we have some shared language, shared experiences, and have had the opportunity to build relationships through those shared experiences to contribute meaningfully to action planning.
No, thank you for that. So, you know, we've kind of gone through all the food groups. You know, we've talked about our protein, which is our action planning and having strong values. We've talked a little bit about vegetables, with, you know, a self-reflection and education. Now, I'm going to move on to, you know, probably my favorite part of dieting, and that's the dessert. You know, I like the stuff that makes me feel good. It might not stick to the ribs, but, you know, it's still, well, in my opinion, you know, a necessary thing that you have to indulge in. So with that being said, what are some of the desserts of diet work?
I'll jump in here. One of the things that I feel like people don't often get to see, but if they're able to engage meaningfully in this work and to really transform their organizations, then one thing that people often talk about is that the climate or the atmosphere in their workplace feels different, right? And so like when you're able to create a place where people really feel like they belong, where they're really valued, where they're really seen for who they are as human beings, and they're able to engage in meaningful work that has a real kind of impact, then people feel really good about that. They might not be able to pinpoint exactly why, because it's a lot of little things working together, right? But for me, that's the icing on the cake, right? So I think we all have those experiences of entering into a workplace and we could feel the oppression, right? Like it's just not a comfortable place to be there. And that's kind of where that whole idea of the work self and the real self kind of come from, I think, um, but yeah, like the thing about organizations and human beings, because organizations are collections of human beings, are that they're incredibly complex, and so there's all these signals and all these things like floating around us all the time that we can't ever say, this is what's wrong or this is what's going right, which is again what makes this work so difficult. But if we're able to pull off like sufficient conditions to advance racial equity, to realize these kinds of things that we're talking about, then it's really a quality of life thing that we're talking about here, right? Like it's not only an organizational transformation, but it's like the quality of your life as an organization and as individuals is just so much better.
Mhm. Thank you for that, Rico. When we think about desserts, right, they're things that we enjoy and we love. And related to the conversation we were having earlier about veggies, right? There are a lot of times where things that folks think are veggies, and Kashana also mentioned this, um, that are actually dessert. And so some of the opportunities that might not be obvious are number one, when there are racial inequities, when we look at the data and we see, yeah, there are less people of color in leadership and there are not enough women in certain roles. Sorry for all the noise.
Got a whole symphony going on there.
But when we are seeing these patterns of inequities across identities, and when we're talking about racial inequities, we're talking about people of color or BIPOC folks. And what's really fascinating is it's not a problem with the people who are on the end experiences of those inequities, right? When we're able to really be thoughtful and use critical thinking skills, we're actually able to swim upstream to see this really isn't about an interpersonal relationship. It's about what we've tolerated as behavior that is acceptable in the organization. So that's a culture issue, right? If we swim upstream, we might find, oh, the reason why we don't have so many people of color in leadership roles is because our promotional system is actually broken. So what it actually is showing us is that there are these red flags, and the red flags are the inequities that we find when we look at the data and when we talk to people about the experiences they're having in organizations. And so this work really is an opportunity to actually fix real problems that are harmful disproportionately to BIPOC people and other underestimated identities, but also are problematic for the whole organization. Because if you have a broken promotional process, that's not sustainable, and you are not going to get the best talent in your leadership positions. If you have an environment where people don't feel like they are valued or they are constantly being disrespected, that's not sustainable because people are going to want to leave the organization. So the dessert there is keeping people. Mm-hmm. The dessert is having processes and systems that work for folks in the organization, because that is going to overall improve your operations and long-term success as an organization. And it is not going to happen tomorrow or the next day, but it's a long-term commitment. And that's what all things that are important are: long-term commitments.
Oh, everybody, Kashana's back in the comments. And I love the way that Kashana is phrasing things. So Kashana says, true, you can't cook an award-winning turkey with a rusty pot. And that is just striking visual imagery. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for adding that. I think it's, it speaks to, if we're talking about a balanced diet and we're thinking about it from a perspective of like a person, if you have all of these parts, you have this balanced meal, then you're going to be stronger, you're going to be healthier, you're going to have all of those pieces of you that can, fully participate in living life. And so, Dr. Martin, all of those things that you mentioned around like, this is dessert, this is the good stuff around an organization, it's the same thing as if you're thinking about yourself when it comes to a balanced diet too. It's finding those things that you have to bring in to make you healthier. And you can't just ignore those red flags.
Absolutely, Janeen. And one thing I'll quickly add there is kind of this idea of what we're really talking about is reframing, right? Reframing. People use that word a lot, but we're really talking about taking a misperception that people have, not dismissing them through, as we've been talking about self-righteousness, but really adding context that helps them to see things in a different way. You thought that was some mushy, poorly cooked carrots or broccoli, but in fact, that's dessert. And when you taste it, go ahead and see for yourself, right? And so I think being able to help people see that this process of innovation and change and evolution is actually the whole point of life and organizations. And if we're not doing that, then what are we doing? We're just clinging to comfort. And we're clinging to things that are not productive for individuals and organizations and are not productive for the organization itself. And so a lot of leadership, and I've sat in lots of different meetings nationally, locally here in Boston and Massachusetts, where I hear leaders, people in kind of C-suite and above positions really talk about, well, if this is so important, then what are the metrics?
Yeah.
Right. And what they're missing is metrics come in multiple types. There's quantitative stuff, right? But representation is not the metric. Representation is the one of the first steps in directions that make sense. But really what we're talking about is process. Like, how do you develop processes? How do you go through change processes that keep us sustainable, right? And having these this reframing of the mushy vegetable to, this is actually dessert, helps us be able to see that this work is process. And it's about bringing people into the process and staying adaptable to navigate all that comes, and knowing that you're never done. There is no checklist, there's no endpoint, there's no easy button, that this work requires us to be in it for the long term, because to Rico's point, the world and the reality that we're in is dynamic, it's complex, and it will always be moving and changing. And so what types of process and learned loving of discomfort that comes with change and growth and innovation that we can bring in to keep this work sustainable and to keep our organizations sustainable.
I love that, Dr. Martin. I think a lot of times I've seen people discuss this work as diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And I love the way that here at All Aces, we have the T. So it is transformation that is really key in this work. It's not just check a box, I did a training, or check a box, I did this thing and I sat in this workshop and talked about my experiences. No, it's transformation. And there's a process, like you said, to be able to transform. It's like a butterfly. It doesn't just come, doesn't just come out as a butterfly. It goes through that cocoon and has to go through that metamorphosis. And so that's part of a part of being transformed, is like doing the work in the process as well and understanding that.
Thank you. You made me remember that I didn't finish one piece that I think is important to this conversation, which is about how people think about data and metrics. And so people are used to quantitative, like just numbers, show me the numbers. Oh, it went up, so then that's good. So then we're great and that thing works. Versus you actually need qualitative data from people who are in the organization, the employees, all the way up through leadership. And if you have a board, you need qualitative information from the people who are impacted by the work you're doing. The business sector tends, or the private sector tends to understand that a little bit better than sometimes nonprofit and governments, in the sense that there's studies that go out like, is this product or service a thing people actually want and need? And how do we know that? Because we talked to people and we did interviews and we really looked at, does this thing work? That's the same thing that we have to do on the DEI side. We have to be willing to hear from people the hard stuff that might be an indicator that although we've done a lot of stuff, maybe we haven't made all the progress that we thought we did. But the only way, let me reframe, the most impactful way that we learn that is through engaging with the people who are most impacted by what we're doing, and not being afraid to hear the hard stuff. Because if you create a space where people are willing to say the hard stuff, that is a gift. And you should accept it and receive it as such instead of being defensive.
We've got another comment coming in here. I know we're kind of moving to the end of our time, but Miranda Morgan says, those of us nestled in our privilege need to be the ones to raise the red flags and serve the meat and potatoes. We've been eating nothing but dessert and basking in the sweetness. Thank you, Miranda. The problem is most of us can't cook. We have the tools and even the ingredients, but never made an effort to apply them for the benefit of others. Anybody like to jump in there?
So first of all, thank you, Miranda, for sharing that. Completely agree, and I'll add a slight tweak to it. And that would be that it's not just those of us nestled in privilege, which we all can, have some level of privilege in different contexts, but it's all of us as human beings who are struggling to build the relationships with ourselves, to really be able to see ourselves and to be able to manage ourselves in meaningful ways that are respectful of our own humanity, so that we can then engage with other folks. So I would say this is a challenge, not just for people that have privilege. It's also a challenge for all of us, because we've all been infected with these ideas about who we're supposed to be, how we're supposed to be. And as a Black woman whose family has roots in America for hundreds of years, the types of ideas that I have had to excavate so that I could be my best self are related to some of the false conditioning about what success looks like, right? About what it means to do good work, about who should we be seeking respect and affirmations from. And so that part about us not being able to cook, I'm translating that into us not being able to fully build the kind of muscles and skills, and therefore muscles, that allow us to take those tools and ingredients we have to really apply them for the benefit of ourselves and for others, right? Because it's a mutually reinforcing cycle, and it's not selfish to build a good relationship with yourself. Because when we don't have good relationships with ourselves, it makes it harder for us to have good relationships with other people. So thank you so much, Miranda. That was a brilliant metaphor.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in very quickly on the cooking metaphor. So I love to cook, and so, my girlfriend, she really appreciates that about me, and she was asking me how I developed those skills, and my answer was, I messed up a lot of times, but I ate my mistakes. I ate my mistakes. I suffered through them. I said, oh, that was gross. And then I went back to it and I made it right the next time, and I think that's so important for this work, making mistakes, acknowledging those mistakes, making mistakes together, and then saying, okay, let's not do that again. Let's figure out a better way forward, and so often that doesn't happen.
This is going to be super short. My mother used to always say, take the lesson, not the loss. Take the lesson, not the loss. So that's what it takes to innovate, grow, and learn to be our best selves.
So very quickly, I just want to acknowledge something that I've kind of heard some themes here. Number one, how you prepare the diet meal and how you present the diet meal are two very key factors in being able to move the work forward. And I just want to ask you all something, just because our audience might have this thought. Is there a specific way that you have to eat your meal? So is there the protein has to be first or the vegetables have to be first? Or is this work able to be done where it's essentially you're able to customize and see what works best for you and your organization?
It's a good question. I'll jump in on this. I've got some friends that they do the thing where they eat each part of their meal separately. I've got other parts. I got one friend in particular. He always says this. It's kind of irritating, but he's like, I like to make a mini meal on my fork. It annoys me because I do that too, but I just don't think of it in that way. But I mean, I can see the value in both. Like sometimes I'm eating like a really rich protein or a starch or something, and then I need a little bit of freshness from the vegetables. Like that contrast is kind of nice. And then other times the flavors play really well off each other. And I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna get everything all in one bite. And it's each bite is different, and recognizing that is totally fine. But I think cultivating your taste buds here, like to extend the metaphor a little bit, is the important thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I have a son who's a picky eater, and he can't have his foods touched. So there's like he barely eats vegetables, but the plate has to be separated. And I feel like when doing this work, the best thing that we can do, we can certainly come in, as Dr. Martin mentioned earlier, as kind of the content providers and the framework and the blueprint. But really what matters the most in creating that meal with our clients is it's co-created. It's the ability for us to come in, to hear you, to speak with you, to understand you, and then like make sure that, okay, we're going to put a little more vegetables here for this client because they need it. We're going to put a little more sweets here, so that helps things come into play. But yeah, I think it's definitely something that should be unique to each organization because your organizations are going to be different.
Mm-hmm. It actually reminds me of this theme that keeps coming up. A few weeks ago, I was at the International Association of Emergency Managers Conference. And one of the themes for me that kept coming up in the sessions that I facilitated and then that I attended were, what is the mission, right? Like, what is the work we're actually trying to accomplish? And in order for us to claim to be doing it well, we actually have to be able to accomplish that mission for everyone, not just for some people. And that might feel like more work right now. And that's because not because it's extra work, but it's work we haven't been doing that we should have been doing. And so now we have to build a muscle to then be able to do this thing that we're not used to doing. So if we are in government, if we're in nonprofits, if we're in the business world, that all of the missions that we respect, our respective missions of serving whoever our target audience and markets are, that racism and other forms of oppression and our own perceptions of realities based on those filters we were talking about earlier can get in our way of actually accomplishing the mission. And so when in doubt, right, are we actually accomplishing the mission for everyone we're supposed to be accomplishing it for? And if we're not, then what is it that we need to change? And being accepting of the fact that it's going to take a little bit of work. I can't cook my meal just for me. I'm not cooking just for me. I'm cooking for everybody who is at the table. And if that's what I'm doing, then I have to prepare, take extra steps, because I might have someone who's a vegetarian. I might have people who have allergies, right? And so I have to prepare those meals with respect to who's actually at the table, not what's convenient for me. And I think that's a pitfall that we often have in doing this work.
Yeah, thank you for answering that, and hopefully that was helpful for the audience. So this conversation has been fantastic, and unfortunately we are already down to 6 minutes left. Where does the time go? But I just want to open the floor up for some of the key takeaways that you'd like to share with everybody that's watching and listening.
I can kick us off. We talked a lot about resistance, right? Resistance is real. You're going to experience resistance, just like when you were a kid. Eating your Brussels sprouts is not the best thing. But I think as we've gotten older and as we've matured, we've actually grown to like Brussels sprouts. So I don't know about you, but every time I go into a restaurant, it's like on the menu. I see tons of people eating it. I usually order it myself. And so, just have that ability to know that your palate is going to change over time, right? And like give yourself that space and that grace to explore, to learn, to have that humility, to do that self-reflection, to be open to understanding differences and having conflict in conversations. But like, hey, you might really like Brussels sprouts in the end. So just be open to it.
What I like about that, Janeen, is, and people might not know this, but the Brussels sprouts that we had as children are actually different than the Brussels sprouts that we're eating today and enjoying so much, right? A lot of work went in on the back end to make them taste better and like less bitter. And so, while we're doing our changing ourselves, like other people out there might be changing as well. So when we try to meet in the middle again, it might be a totally different outcome. And I think that's where, for me, the self-reflection piece comes in, right? So we function on a lot of mental shorthand, like assumptions and, heuristics and these kinds of things. And so checking in on how we're playing into situations, I think, is just super, super important, right? Because it might be that, in fact, we are not playing into a situation, but we can't really know that until we kind of create some space to stop and really analyze what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Dr. Martin, did you want to add anything?
Just quickly, I just want to acknowledge Miranda's comment in the post. This acknowledgement that, when people can't cook, right? And the metaphor of cooking was tied to build a relationship with themselves, build skills to interact better with themselves and other people, and which is especially important for leadership. In living in a society that kind of makes it more attractive and easier to take the well-worn path, right? And so what I want to challenge us to is not to abdicate our power, right? Power isn't just traditional power and who has money and who makes the policy decisions and all those things. Every one of us has power, right? We have power to know ourselves, power within. We have power to have agency, to be able to take action in the world, in our own spaces, even if it's just being very clear about what my red lines are, about how I need to be treated as a human being, about what I need to be successful. And then there's power with, and that's our collective power when we get together in organizations. Please make no mistakes about it, that when we see change happening in organizations, they happen in lots of different ways. And a lot of times it comes from employees coming together and really lifting up the voices of each other in what the challenges are, and being willing to work with leadership on a different way of being. That requires us to have all types of power that's not associated with traditional power that we're interacting with. And so I encourage everyone to hold on to your power, continue to build it and grow it. And as always, sending lots of love, hope, and intentional action to everyone.
Before we do close out, I gotta say, Miranda is back in the comments again with another one. We'll have to take this maybe next month when we're back. But she says, unfortunately, most times the people that can't cook order out. They let others do the work for them. In the age of social media and the quick fix, you can even get it delivered to your door. You don't even have to get up. I'd imagine that makes your work at All Aces so much harder.
Yes, and that was the exact comment I was responding to.
Okay.
In this whole piece around, not taking the easy way out, the hard work of if you want to make a difference, if you want to have power and use power, it actually comes with a lot of, this is going to sound so cliche, y'all, I'm so sorry, but it comes with a lot of responsibility, right? It comes with a lot of effort and a lot of work. And so if you want freedom, if you want power, you have to be willing to take on the work and presence and consciousness and skill building and relationship building that comes with it. So just thank you so much, you all, for being so engaged in the conversation today. Really amazing. And I just want to also flag that LinkedIn user. We have to move beyond the hustle, one plate meal type, traded depth for speed. We need to slow down and be intentional about learning experiences that are a bridge. I just want to say, I don't know who that is, but I just want to say thank you for that, because that basically is what we've been talking about today, right? This is the crux of it all. It's not about the creation of the meal, right? It's about how we went through the process and how we created meals that actually are good for the people who are on the receiving end of the meal. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. So we are at the 1 hour. So I want to very quickly say we are recording this on the last days of Men's Mental Awareness Month, Men's Health Awareness Month. And a lot of times we think of men's health as, physical, working out, doing all the things. But one thing that is overlooked from time to time is the mental part of it too. Trauma and harms can be triggered during this work, unfortunately, part of it. But eating your vegetables, having a balanced meal can absolutely help with that, the mental and physical part, as well as your life expectancy. So with that being said, I just want to say thank you to you all. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining me, my All Aces team. Thank you, everybody that's joined us on LinkedIn. We appreciate the comments. We appreciate the insight. And last but not least, if you are an employee or you're just a person that wants to be a disruptor of racism, please send your comments, everything to info@allaces.com. That is info@allaces.com. And we thank you all for being here. Have a great rest of your week.
Wait, sorry. I just have to say this, interject there. It's info@allacesinc.com.
I missed it. Look,
I got you.
the screen.
Thank you, everyone.
Y'all be safe, stay healthy. Oh, y'all gone.